She's been an advisor to the Georgian president and the prime minister of Moldova, among other people. She's an expert on Russian influence and information warfare, and she has a wonderful Substack called Great Power. Molly McKew, welcome back. How are you?
Hey guys, how you doing?
So happy to see you.
Yes.
I'm not muted, right? I can't see anything on
No,
this.
you're not
you're
muted.
good.
Okay, good. It's good to see you too. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry I couldn't come last week.
That's okay.
Fine.
That's fine. We did a neat show. We needed to, which is, no guest.
Yeah.
But
it was fine.
We're happy to have you this week, coming up on 4th of July next week.
Oh yeah, it is,
Oh,
isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Oh, what year of Germany are we? What do you think?
Yes. What do you think?
I mean, still early 30s, but solidly into the phase where the hypermasculinity bullshit is being used to recruit Nazis.
Oh, 32, 33.
Yeah.
All right, that's not as
like
far along.
Hitler's favorite royal already has the full outfit. Like, they're all in on this. You're right, women are terrible, and men should be manly men, and we should be in charge of everything. And you're like, oh yeah, sure, like, great idea. How did you think of it? Yeah.
Have you seen the Daddy's Home stuff? Do you know what we're talking about?
I cannot with this. And yes, I have seen it, but I want to like scour my eyes with sand. I mean, I can't.
These are, to me, though, this is part of a collection of things that when we do get to whatever the new thing is going to be, because we're definitely changing human beings.
As Peter Thiel mentioned in the interview.
We
don't want to stagnate.
No, we don't want to stagnate.
Can't stagnate.
Stagnation.
Yeah.
I mean, your point though about the stagnating farts is like even worse than the stagnating farts in the hall of academia, which I think we can all agree is a real phenomenon. Not to say academia is not important, but even worse than that is when you have two totally useless people talking to each other in an interview, each of them trying to make the other more wonderful. And it's just like there's a point where you just like are like, why do we listen to anyone? Like, I don't understand.
You're basically dismantling Wired magazine right now. But
no, but I like Wired.
I know you were one of your best pieces for Wired. I remember.
I do like Wired. They put up with a lot from me, but yeah, I just and now everybody is talking to every one of the like dark enlightenment goons as if like, oh, if we talk to them, we will draw out the true genius, and then everyone will understand. And it's like, you're not gonna understand it because it's just kooky eugenics shit. Like,
it's garbage.
That's it. Like, it's just it's men who don't want women in charge of anything, who will vote for anyone who is not a woman to be in charge of the things, and then like will tell you that giving up all your rights and freedoms so that they can just be in charge of everything while the rest of you die, probably of measles, is a great idea. And you're like, who buys this shit? But apparently an awful lot of people actually do.
That's true.
Yeah. Who is John Galt? John Galt is a fictional character that appeals to like 8th grade boys. That's it.
It's true.
That's who John Galt is.
That is who John Galt is.
So I have to ask, and I know this is we're in this ridiculous performative pro wrestling match with Iran right now, which I wrote, it's like Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik at this point. But looking at it from your standpoint, having been in rooms with people that make decisions that are important, what do you make of all this? What's your takeaway watching it, other than I can't believe this is happening in pure absolute embarrassment for the country?
Embarrassment. That's where I was going.
I mean, in the before times of when I got to go back and just do this Russia stuff that I care more about, I had a brief stint at a think tank. Well, long, but during the Iraq War days, I was at a think tank, and one of the things I covered was actually Iran non-pro stuff. So I know way too much about the Iranian nuclear situation. However, that being said, what I know mostly about this is there are everybody in DC has their little thing that's like their thing, and it's like the thing that is their mothership. But there is nothing worse than the Iran obsessives. People like Michael Flynn, who were convinced that Iran was the true hand of evil behind every bad thing happening. Like, there is no Russia, there is no China, it's all just Iran. And you're like, no, that's not the thing that it ever was. But they're convinced that, like, that's the thing. Those were the people who showed up and were just, like, in Trump's brainworm situation and convinced him this was a great idea. And, like, do I want the mullahs to have a nuclear weapon? Sure. No, absolutely not. Like, this is a terrible idea. But, like, was this all performative, and somehow all three powers involved declared that they won the thing? Yeah, I mean, you're looking at it and you're like, what? Like, and how much did that cost?
Yeah.
Okay, how much did that cost? And I got to ask you this, a little bit of, has there ever been a time, or is this sort of normal procedure, that the commander-in-chief, president of the United States, collaborates with the people who are going to bomb a U.S. airbase so that it gets sort of coordinated in the way that works for the U.S. president?
I'm not into many of the things that happened in what seems to have been the timeline of all of these events. I mean, just the whole thing is like...
But has that ever happened before? He came out and said, I talked to them, I told them.
He said it was okay. 1 o'clock would be good.
1 o'clock. He gave them, he came out and told us. Now, he might just be
full of shit
because he's full of shit a lot, and just sort of saying that because it makes it, he's got some inside out thing where it makes him sound, he thinks it sounds like he was in control of the whole thing, and that's somehow good. But
it does sound like
he did this, Molly. He said
it does say, yeah, I think they were warned, and that this time there seems to have been, at least I hope, significantly less injuries on any of our servicemen and women. Because, the last time, as much as Trump, I think, dismissed it as headaches or whatever, like, a big missile lands on top of you when you're in a bunker and you absolutely get traumatic brain injuries, which, as we all know, is like the number one cause of everything going wrong with everyone who's ever served in the uniformed military. So, I hope it is true that we had enough warning that all of our significant assets, primarily our human assets, were moved out of harm's way in a real way. But I mean, at the same time, it just is like the dumbest, like, so everybody got what they needed. Like Israel got a performative bombing that made their thing okay. And we got, we were the biggest, baddest bombers dropping out.
We got to do Top Gun. We got to do the second Top Gun. Everybody, Pete Hegseth wanted to see if our fighter pilots could do that in real life.
Was it the New York Times that had the headline about the greatest, secretest operation ever? And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, every awesome person in the world was like watching the very slow bombers fly around the world in real time. With the refueling stops, and you're just like, there was no secret about the bombers.
Yeah.
It was a very weird week, and I'm not going to pretend like it wasn't a super weird series of events to watch, particularly from outside the country, where everyone watching it is just sort of wondering. And I think same inside the country, where had it not been this very strange reality play, the potential for this type of activity to then spiral into, okay, other shit's going wrong in the Middle East. Now China is using the opportunity to do something. Russia's going to do something else in the Baltic Sea. Like, the opportunity for something that dumb, if the U.S. had actually decided to, like, do some ground war in Iran, to spiral into, like, some global scale chaos. Like, that's a very real thing. And while I think a lot of it was fear projecting, and, like, the reality of a lot of those data points is not, like, not everybody is prepared for all of those things in a war. But, yeah, I mean, this would have been really stupid. Like, it would have been really stupid.
Yeah. Even though it was, they're putting on a show. I saw people in the streets terrorized, running for their lives. Like, people were terrorized. People died.
The show's not good if the actors don't perform. And when it's real people, you need them to be afraid. And I think this is the problem with a lot of the stuff that's happening in the US, outside of the US, where you have boys with toys talking to each other on the red phones, is a lot of people are paying the price for this type of, I don't even know what to describe it as, but it's not very democratic, and it is certainly not a good look for the United States of America in the world.
Now you are still in Europe. You spent some time in the Baltics, and you were mentioning to us before we hit record and went live just how it is for you to be there in a different country and how it alters your perspective. So talk about that a little, because like, what do people think about us there now? Are there, have they given up on us, or do they know that, you know, it's just the crazies are in charge and we'll get rid of this guy eventually and swing back? Like what are you hearing and seeing?
You know, it's really interesting. On the stuff that I work on Russia-related topics, obviously I go the places I go and I know the people I know because they're the ones who know more than us most of the time. And I have learned a lot from them. And having that kind of collaborative relationship with people really helps me figure out how to try to explain better in the United States who our actual enemy is and what we need to be doing. And so there's always been that dynamic for me of, when you're talking to anybody in the US, especially the US policy, whatever the blob, the term that we use, like when you're talking to people in the US who have worked on Russia for too long, there's all these like narrative parameters they live inside that are just false. And you start feeling crazy when you're talking to them because there's like an explanation for why nothing can be done about anything. And you're like, am I the crazy one? Like, I really feel crazy. And then you leave and you talk to real people and you're like, okay, wait, no, it's fine. Like, I am not the crazy one. I'm actually like, maybe a little more sane than some others. And it used to just be on the stuff that I worked on related to Russia. And now it's like everything. And you are in the States, and yeah, sure, people see the news and nobody's happy about it, but everybody is buying groceries and walking their dogs and going to work. And it's like, you know, what are you going to do?
So normalized. Yeah.
And then you leave and everybody's like, what is going on? Like, what is this story? And they show you some story because the foreign news coverage of what's happening in the US is so much better than what we get from our mainstream media. And there is great coverage happening locally from independent reporters, from great newsletters, from, you know, people just cataloging stuff themselves in the street. But none of that gets the national boost of big media. And when you see the kind of coverage that's happening overseas, especially in Europe, in our other allied nations who really care about the state of American democracy and overall sanity and ability to be a security guarantee and economic guarantee in the world, yeah, it looks pretty bad and nuts. And it's just so much easier to see the bad nutsness from way outside the black hole at the center of the galaxy than in the middle where you're just spinning around it all the time. I felt a lot better like the day after I left, and I was just like, oh, like this is okay. Like now I actually have mental space to write something down on paper. It was good to leave and do productive things and not be caught in the spiral so much. But I think it is so hard for Americans to understand how far, I mean, they see the way Europeans are talking about us because we talk a lot about this particular security aspect, but how far beyond us people have already moved. And if you talk to like Indonesia, the Philippines, like countries we don't even really talk about most of the time because it's just like so far down the list of priorities for the United States, nobody is waiting around for us to figure our shit out. Like they're just like, you guys do you, we're gonna move on with stuff. And the overall power structures that used to be US global police, and I know we don't like it, but like that was a really useful thing for us to have.
It was really useful.
So useful. And then all the soft power stuff, which we just evaporated for absolutely no reason.
Well,
and then the craziness that will do the economic disruption. So you have security, like the social goodness and the economic disruptions that are all now caused by us, not bolstered by us, problem solved by us. Everybody's just like, you know, we're kind of done with that. And the cost to us as a nation of losing all of that invisible web that used to support us as individuals working in the world when we were doing anything, charity work, diplomatic work, business work, security work. That's all gone. And as a nation, like, that goodwill is really evaporated. And I think, you were mentioning the daddy's home situation.
Fast.
But the NATO summit this week, like, the real message was, like, keep it short, just get Trump in and out of here so there ain't going to be a blow up. But the real message was, what they're worried about is us. Like, it's like there was so much less focus on real enemy threats because we're actually the immediate threat in terms of upsetting security. And it is good that they're going to spend more. It is good that they have a better security vision for Europe now, absent the US, should we evaporate. All of these things are good and positive, but just the changed dynamic of how the pieces are fitting together really put us all at greater danger.
So we're talking 1939.
Yeah.
Germany now.
Swell. Yeah. I guess. I mean, nobody left the NATO summit saying peace in our time, so we're okay for a few more months. You wrote a really great piece on your Substack, which again is called Great Power, and everything you write is great there, and it makes me feel smarter, and it also makes me feel sane because there's so much bullshit going around, so much bad information, disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. There's different words for this stuff. I learned that this week. And but talk a little bit about this thin blue line piece, because again, and you alluded to it before about how people in the United States looking at Russia have these little rules and things that they think, and they wind up being wrong about half of this stuff. So just talk a little bit about the overarching themes in that piece, just so people watching get a sense of it.
I'm glad that you like that piece. Thin Blue and Yellow Line was the title, because actually it's about Ukraine. But for me, it was a long piece. I tend to write long form pieces, as all y'all who read my things know. But I do that for a reason, which is, the 600 to 800 word op-ed format of here's an idea, and because I'm right, it's the idea, and then the idea again, and goodbye. It's just not what's going to change any of our minds or give us more nuance in what's going on. And I actually think that's really important. And the piece, looking at the beginning of the mass enforcement raids that are happening, the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines in California to help this stuff, seeing the kind of lines that are being blurred and crossed, and the argumentation that's being used by this administration to do those things, like, for me, it's just all connected to the real security threats that we face, which begins with the fact that Russia attacked the United States of America in 2015 and 2016. And because Donald Trump won and felt that that made his victory less credible, he has ignored it and insisted that we all ignore it ever since, which just puts us in this extremely strange security perspective on Russia as a nation, which then the Obama people were awful on Russia, the Biden people were equally awful on Russia, to be candid. And the way that we approached Ukraine at the beginning was stupid and wrong. I mean, in the beginning of 2022, with the full-scale invasion, let alone 2014, when we just sort of left them, to the first Russian invasion.
There's some blankets,
And that all does connect to now how the ability of the current administration to turn everything on its head and put us in the place we are now of fighting an enemy that isn't real. And for me, this thin blue line concept, and again, I'm not a person who just like blanket hates the popo. I grew up in Idaho where, it's like nice sheriffs who, this is not a thing that you thought about, like the cops being your enemy. This was like the cops were your friends type country. And I really hate this thin blue line sticker / ideology that has become this thing about law enforcement in the US, because the inherent concept of it is, as it is used by law enforcement now, is only us is the line between chaos and order in society. And while I understand why they feel that way sometimes, and certainly living in a country where there's guns saturating every possible surface area, is that probably a really hard place to be police? Yes. But it's false. It's an absolute lie. Like, democracy works because all of us agree to give up a little bit of our freedoms, like ultimate freedom, like, totally, total complete freedom. Like, you can't run naked through the streets shooting at people if you feel like it. But we give up a little bit of our freedom to live in a society where there are orders and structures that we then don't have to do everything for ourselves, meaning you don't have to grow your own food. Somebody helps do that. You don't have to police your own yard. Somebody helps do that. This is how it works. We all agree to participate in the system. It is not the line of the blue cops holding back chaos. It is all of us. It is democracy that is holding back chaos. They're just there for the anomalies. And when I was looking at this, because I was trying to figure out before, like, where this came from, this, like, how did this become such a flag? It's on everybody's cars, the stupid thin blue line stickers. And, like, how did this become such a thing? And actually, like, the origin of the phrase was a poem written about the American Army. The thin blue line was the Union Army, let's be clear, not those Confederate guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, the subject of the poem was what a unique, this was written in the, early 1900s, I think, but that the American Army was such a unique thing in history as a defender of freedom, as a force against oppression, that it was so lucky that it got to stand for these, that was seen as standing for these things. And it was a warning. And it was obviously in the context of other things happening in the US at the time, but it was a warning that if they ever forget that that's what they are and are ever used as a tool of oppression to please a mad emperor or dictator or blah, 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 that they will regret it. And for us right now, this is such an important message to remember and to understand. The line of conflict we need to be looking at is not this imaginary enemy that we're being defended by masked man against in the United States, but like the war in Ukraine, which we need to win because Russia needs to lose, or we actually lose everything that really matters for us as a nation. Yeah. And these things are connected. And until we have that clarity to understand where the real battle is, and I'm not saying there's not stuff we need to do in America, obviously lots of domestic problems that we need to address. But in terms of structurally reinforcing the stuff that matters to us domestically as a nation in terms of our rights and freedoms and security and economic well-being, and then how we benefit from all those things in the world, the way to reinforce that moving into this totally kooky century that is going to be hard, like it is going to be a hard century, the way to move into that better is defeating Russia in Ukraine. And the fact that we have not had a government of the last four that has been able to articulate that clearly and set the priorities well for America helps contribute to where we are now domestically. And it's really disappointing to me. Sorry, that was a really long.
No, that's what we want.
It's what we want.
But it is like, it was a hard piece to write because there's like 8 sections or whatever that don't actually really connect to each other, except they do. Like, it's a progression of how we get from getting this wrong, like we have to deny 2016 all the way down to where we are now, and that those things really do matter and they are connected, and we're failing our allies, we're failing Ukraine, we're failing ourselves as a nation.
One another. Yeah, we're failing this nation.
Yeah. No, and Ukraine has strategically, it's a valuable place.
Yes.
It's the largest country in Europe. Russia's two different
grain.
It's right in the middle of Europe. It's just crazy that we're not in there all the time. And all we had to do was give them more arms and money. We didn't have to send troops in. We didn't have to do anything.
And even if you don't believe any of the big, democracy rhetoric about Ukraine winning and Russia losing, just where it is now in terms of the cost, if Ukraine loses or Russia is allowed to seem the victor now, Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe. It is extremely arable land and valuable resources in Europe. It is a big country of, now many displaced, but 44 million people in Europe. And it is the biggest standing army in Europe by a significant amount, with the most combat experience. If you exclude Russia, because it can go be its own Eurasian thing.
the most combat experience, but also with, we may have held back very critical resources, but boy, did they learn how to use what they do have. So it's a modern army as well.
Yeah. And what we don't want is them being occupied by Russia and have to fight for the Russians, and then they fucking hate us, and then they're on the other side. And that is like a thing that could happen if we're actually stupid enough to think that we can just walk away from Ukraine and somehow that war is going to end, which it's not. Like, I don't think the Ukrainians have any intention of not continuing to fight for themselves. And yes, it will be hard and bloody and terrible. And no, that is not a thing I want or cheer for. But they know what it looks like. They know what Russian occupation looks like. It's stolen children and people tortured and abused, and, arbitrary disappearances and executions. And like that, like, this is the modern stuff. That's not even the Soviet stuff where they starved them to death. Like, this is just the modern, like, stuff happening in the occupied territories. Nobody wants that. And at this point, because we have deprived them of the necessary resources to conduct the war in a sensible way, they've had to fill the gaps themselves, and they don't need as much of our fancy, extremely expensive shit. They can just make their own shit out of spare parts, and they're doing just fine. And it's a little nuts, this experiment that has been run on, can you fight a war without any of the things that you need to fight the war? But the Ukrainians have risen to that challenge in an absolutely amazing and admirable way, and that is because of their human resources, 100%. That is the only thing they have, is the people and the will of the people and the will of their leadership to let the will of the people mean something. And it's such an incredible place to be and to speak to anyone and to know and to see any of the stuff that's actually happening and how that happens. And the fact that anybody could look at that and be like, nah, let's go like fight some guys at the southern border. What? Like,
no,
what?
Yeah. You mentioned it in your piece, like anybody that talked to anybody in Kyiv knew that they weren't going to just surrender and run away. Like, they weren't just going to do that. I was at the Ukrainian Institute in New York a couple weeks ago with journalists that are there covering the stuff. And there was a Ukrainian journalist there, and she said basically, why, when asked why they keep fighting, her answer was, war is bearable, occupation is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
absolutely
they're going to keep fighting. So the sooner it ends, the better, and they need to win.
And there's all these, stupid nuances in the Russian stuff, and again, often misrepresented in how it is written about or talked about in our media. But there is this strange competition between the Russian intelligence and security services, right? Like, there's the military intelligence guys and the FSB guys and the foreign intelligence guys, whatever. But it's been a hard thing to understand in Ukraine that the conduct of the war has been such shit. And they are now learning, adapting more. There is still a lot of shit, but like, there is a different Russian army on the field than there was. But the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022, like, the Russian army was such shit, but the occupation authority, which is under more of the FSB structure, was absolutely the same Stalinist manuals, and they were so efficient and so good at what they were doing so quickly. And the early reporting out of the, especially at the beginning part where there was a lot of occupation, deoccupation, like lines going back and forth, but any of the time you saw the reporting coming from the recently deoccupied regions, it was just like, oh, it's those guys still. And the Ukrainians know. Everybody knows. They all know all the guys who have been the prisoners of war, who have been exchanged back, the civilian detainees that have been exchanged back, the kids who have escaped from Russian kidnapping and come back. Like, they all know what these people have been through. Nobody is not tortured and maimed and, like, just absolutely horrific things done to them. Okay, they don't torture the kids, but psychologically, yes. Yeah. But, like, they all know. Like, nobody's like, oh, we can just stop fighting and it'll be just fine. Like, it's not fine.
I mean, maybe Trump could just say ceasefire and then everything will be fine. That usually isn't the
Well, he did try Vladimir Stop. It didn't work, but maybe if we put it on a mug.
Yeah.
Only if it's made in China.
Only if it's made in China.
Now, one more question, and then we're going to move on to the next topic, which is there was a report which you said, I can't remember who was writing about it, that the United States government wants to basically make it harder to for people to get tried for war crimes.
Yeah.
So which tracks. But what's your take on that? I mean, Putin is committing war crimes like on the regular, obviously in Ukraine. I mean, horrible stuff. As people watching this show know from Zarina's reporting. But what's your do you think that they're afraid that they're going to one day wind up at the ICC? Like, what do you think?
I mean, look, the U.S. has always had sort of a stupid, unhelpful. I mean, it's not stupid. I understand where it comes from. The U.S. has always had a very nuanced position about the ICC, which can be unnuanced into it's a really great idea, but it doesn't apply to us. And having that position on the ICC obviously has always put us in an odd modern position of trying to deal with them. So we have tended to support a lot of war crimes work, investigation, which takes a ton of work, training the prosecutors, which is extremely hard work, dealing with witnesses and all the documentation and archival. Like we've tended to support a lot of war crimes adjacent work, knowing that the ICC business is going to be somebody else's. And there are a lot of, I think we often forget about the places that had horrific modern conflicts that people are still trying to get justice for, and how long that can take. And it's extremely hard, obviously, when these conflicts are not done, and it's not like there's piles of documents you're using, as in Nuremberg and Tokyo and Bosnia. It's still, the Ukrainian prosecutor's office and the other war crimes investigators, and it comes out of all the other services. It's a very group effort, like the domestic police, the SBU guys, the special police. There's a zillion different contributions to, including civilian volunteer NGOs. There's a zillion different contributions to how Ukraine is trying to document and bring justice for Russian war crimes against Ukrainians. But they have opened 140,000 plus cases of war crimes in Ukraine.
Wow.
That include everything from the stolen kids,
stolen children,
torture and missing people, destruction of property and cultural property in particular.
Targeting
civilians, every apartment building that is hit, that is a war crime. But the cultural, there's so many things on the list of like, actually, these meet the criteria of genocide, right? But the way that they have systematically gone about doing this, bringing in new technology tools, what they're doing is so hard to describe in terms of its complexity. In finally bringing justice to anything Moscow has done to any of its adjacent peoples. Like, there's a whole century of crimes that we just decided to like we don't have time to deal with Stalin and his nonsense. Like, we'll just do these other things. But it's a generational effort, and it's so important, and it is so expensive and hard to do in terms of the human hours needed to do this kind of prosecution work. And the U.S. has just decided to not fund any of that anymore. And I don't just mean for Ukraine, but although I think that is the specific reason why this is sort of, though, we're not going to do this anymore. But that also includes stuff that was happening for Sudan, things in Myanmar, like all sorts of other efforts to bring clarity and documentation to atrocity crimes. And understanding, of course, how these things happened and how important they are. What I always keep thinking of, especially in the context of Ukraine, is, there's the famous sort of Eisenhower, shows up at a liberated camp, and the horrificness of what he was seeing, which nobody really believed was what was happening, right? They didn't have pictures. They had no idea what it looked like. They didn't think the stories could possibly be real, that this is what was happening to Jews and others, but primarily Jews in Europe. And, he gets there and he looks around and he turns to the military guys with him and he goes, get all the film everything, take all the pictures. And the guys are like, no, we can't. It's too awful. Nobody wants to see this. And he's like, that's exactly the point. If you don't document it, nobody is ever going to believe that this happened. And those film reels and photos and accounts from those first people that they talked to in that camp were absolutely critical to. I think people forget now, having, we've done 70 years of let's figure out that the Holocaust happened and how awful it was, and how much work Jewish communities had to do to convince people that that happened. Like at the end of World War II, nobody really knew what the Holocaust was, or like nobody believed any of this. And doing that storytelling and making this sort of a cultural touch point we all know and observe and have learned from, like that came out of the fact that dudes like Eisenhower didn't let it get erased. And it would have been so much harder for all of the work that Jews had to do to show this history happened if there wasn't that initial documentation. And I think that's what I keep thinking of for Ukraine now is this is the most documented war, right? Like zillions of hours of drone footage, body cams, dudes on the street filming things with their cameras, like everything is documented. But being able to use that as historical documentation, as prosecutorial documentation is really complex. And I think just making sure that all of that is preserved, especially as we have seen in these more recent years, lots of tech bros deciding to delete whole archives of things from the internet as if it never happened. Yeah. Like making sure all of that is preserved, no matter who is in charge of what and decides, we're not really interested in putting Putin on trial. Like, I'm interested in putting Putin on trial. The Ukrainians are interested in putting Putin on trial. The Estonians and Lithuanians and Latvians are interested in putting Putin on trial. And I think that just needs to happen. And the U.S. deciding it's not interested in that as a concept because of all the things the State Department is no longer funding. That is one of 10,000 trillion, right? But I think it's a very specific statement. And there was also, it's worth noting, at the NATO summit, there was, because there were, side meetings with Zelensky and whatnot, there was kind of a statement from a bunch of the people specifically about the accountability issues. Like, we are with you, this will be done, blah, blah, blah. So us coming out just after and being like,
wow,
it's pretty disappointing.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Well, we got to move on.
We got to move on, Marty.
Are you okay? Can you stay for 8 more minutes?
Okay. Absolutely.
Oh, my God. Thank you.
And thank you for that answer.
Sorry I took up so much time.
No.
This is what we want.
That felt like a very complete answer.
Yeah.
And that it's a gut punch that they came away, that we came away, the United States, and did that. Oh, God. All right. 8 minutes back on the clock. Are we okay? Do we know what our next topic is?
I know what our next topic is.
Can we tell
we're talking
Molly?
About, yeah.
All right, let's tell her.
We're talking about the what happened in New York City, which is a nice thing, which is a candidate that people who ran on stuff that people liked and was authentic won in the primary, even though he was fighting against moneyed superpowers on both sides of the aisle. And we'll see what happens with it, but it's certainly an encouraging thing in a lot of ways. But you had a point to make about it, which we wanted to ask Molly about, which is
which one?
Oh, about the if he wins, if Mamdani wins and he's the mayor, which isn't a given.
Yes.
Because they're going to go after him with everything they have to try to get him to stop. Although Cuomo's still running.
Or use him. Go ahead and let him. I see, like New York. I just wanted to, because you've been, around the world. I'm not saying you ever governed a city like New York, the most powerful, wealthiest.
There is no city like New York.
Yeah, there's nothing like it. But in terms of even like looking at these countries where you've because you can put it up there with the countries that actually you did consult with. What about a 33-year-old assemblyman who's really only had 5 people on his staff, all of a sudden running New York City? Would he maybe be a target for a lot of chaos getting thrown his way. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to know your input on that, having worked with.
It was interesting to watch.
Like Moldova to me that's interesting, right?
Yeah, it was interesting to watch some of what was happening. Obviously, I'm not a New Yorker. I had no stake in this election. I was not following it on a minute-by-minute basis. But the things that I observed, number one, if the Democratic Party still thinks that the only thing it takes to win elections is giant bags of money, they've totally missed everything since 2015, and they just need to stop. Like, stop putting the big bags of money with terrible candidates, because it isn't going to work anymore. Mm-hmm. And if it does work, probably in a bad, super cynical way that people are going to be driven further away from partisan politics.
Right. The longevity of it is not quite. It's not quite the right path.
Right. Two, that, and I think this is one that you guys are really focused on too, is the absolute power of narrative architecture in elections. And I mean, depending on what side you're on, you can label it misinformation, disinformation, coercive narrative, truth telling, like everybody's got. But for me in particular, I'm just going to step back and say that both people who absolutely hate Jews and people who absolutely believe that anti-Semitism is the first sign of lots of other bad things that are going to emerge in society and have devastating impacts on other things. All this, everything on that spectrum, everybody needs to stop letting their views on anti-Semitism be weaponized, because that is just everything that's happening in the country right now since October 7th onward. Like, can we just be rational and sane about this? 3 is then, I think there is an intense appetite in the American electorate, and we see this in both parties and all parties and people who are no party, for disruption. And the disruption focuses around, like, yeah, everybody engages in the likes and the clicks and the crazy people posting the videos and the TikToks. But when there are actually people with disruptive ideas that resonate with voters, that's effective and powerful. And I think, real radical ideas like free public transportation and housing people can afford over in Europe doesn't sound so radical or crazy, by the way. Tallinn, totally free public transportation in Estonia. But, these ideas about policies and ideas that will actually materially make people's lives better are going to stand out so much for actual human beings that vote, against the backdrop of a weird national trend of, can't somebody else do it? Let the poor kids not have food. Like, let's take away everybody's health care. Just don't tell them. They'll get over it.
Let's disappear people from the streets.
Let's disappear people.
Oh my God.
But this thing about, like, ideas of better democratic governance, because this is where we've all gotten lost, and the Europeans feel it. Like, everybody who is struggling in a modern democratic context with the democracy dividend for their own people. Like, how does a modern democracy show its people that democracy is still the best system to address their problems and the things they're most focused on? And I think everybody has sort of, in the emergence of technologies and how information reaches us and how we interact with ideas of governance, our actual legislators, like, we want to talk to them online directly, all of this has changed how democracy works. And democracy hasn't caught up yet. And I think we all know that. Some countries have done it better than others. The US is, like, the furthest back. And so seeing these moments of disruptive ideas resonating with people in ways that overcome every hurdle of how elections are supposed to work in the US, to me just indicates that there's this much bigger appetite for real change. And it doesn't need to be radical in a progressive sense. I think we have seen radical in a conservative sense in many things in the United States too. But there's a real appetite for significant disruption. And unless people can, from either party, from whatever party that wants to win this, unless people can harness that understanding, and in particular, I think the Democrats are very far behind on this in the US. I think the conservatives have done better about harnessing the radicalism towards things that are not things I really love. but unless they can harness that energy, they will have no input into who the people are that are emerging from this disruptive time. And it would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be good if everybody was like on the same boat on this one.
I know. I think it goes back to 2.
Yeah.
I think 2 is impacting 3. So just to say, we were talking in our production meeting of like, you know, my 2 being this sort of, everybody needs to just like take a step back and stop allowing whatever, you know, your position is on anti-Semitism to not be weaponized. And it just like, I'm so, and I think that's at the core of it. It's also like your positions on women being weaponized. Like there's all these echoes of how
trans people,
how it's all just weaponized. And my thing that fell out of my mouth about it was like, we're all being led by that weaponization, led like sheep, you know, off of the cliff's edge while our fist is raised and we're shouting, "Fuck the cliff." But going over that, it's like, this is madness.
Yeah.
If we can, and by the way, one of the people, we can move on, but one of the people shouting "Fuck the cliff" that was showing that he was susceptible to all of that is the person that just got elevated, which is why people are reacting to him. You know, he was, you know, that's my issue, is just like, you're so young, you don't have a staff, and you allowed yourself to be swept up into something that was a weaponization of you know, these horrible events that actually are happening that are horrible. So I just want a little bit more sobriety in leadership. I think I'm just really,
it was
just looking for that.
It was interesting to watch that, like on October 7th, like in 2015, I wasn't doing this at all. So I didn't know what to look for when all the disinformation stuff happened. Yeah. But on October 7th, it was fascinating to watch it happen in real time. Know exactly where it was going to go and how they were going to do it, and just be like, oh, yep, they did exactly what I thought they were going to do.
They being people who weaponize,
yes,
yeah,
the chaos
for their chaos agents that weaponize the situation for their own, whatever their own agenda might be.
But we have to hope that, and I think he's young enough, and you know, it doesn't just because you're in something when you're young, and I think the root of what he was protesting wasn't anti-Semitism, it was anti-genocide, honestly.
I understand, but I'm just saying he grabbed that, he grabbed this phrase. He grabbed the phrase, and his brain allowed him to go get swept away. That's what I'm talking about.
It's possible that he learns from that, because you know, I learned from stuff.
We'll see. I you know,
I don't know.
Look, you know, totally different situation, but Zelensky was a young leader with not much experience, and you know, look at who showed up. You know,
well, he played the leader on TV, which is apparently that's that's the best thing that you can possibly do to be a good leader. This is why I want Hugh Grant to be the prime minister, because he was seriously. You know, he was good in the movie, you know. So let's just let it work for Zelensky. I think it's wonderful.
No, Zelensky is a good example, actually, especially for what you were asking about. Is, you know, he really wasn't a good president until it was very clear to him that this moment was arriving where you could either become the wartime president or you were not going to survive very long. And he sort of started playing one on TV, and then he got really good at it. And now he's really good at it. And that is a real thing. And even people who did not like him, did not vote for him, still don't really love him, give him a ton of credit for what he has been able to do. And I think with whoever wins in New York, the mayor's race, because boy, is the forces of the olds coming back out in full force with like all of their creepy "I strangled my girlfriend" campaign managers. This is amazing stories out of New York. But obviously there'll be a circling of the wagons of everybody trying to reestablish control over what seems like now a chaotic process. But whoever wins, and if it is a new person with less experience than I have everyone stagnant governance standards, you know, that's not a bad thing. It's extremely hard to be the outsider taking over a system and figuring out how to set priorities, how to actually govern, how to bring in teams that can do those things, how to keep who you can and bring in new people who can, move all those things productively.
How to be, I have something to add to that, how to be savvy enough to understand that the commander-in-chief might look to clear some pathways for something really devastating to happen so that he can hang something on you and then connect that to Kathy Hochul and then get his woman, Elise Stefanik, into the governorship. That there's actually people who are that cynical and that sinister that will play games like that with New Yorkers' lives and our own national security in order to get a win on the board for themselves and their sycophants and their agenda. And because he's got a grievance that New York City rejected him, as evidenced by all of his life. And the most recent thing he did of going in, and I'm going to now be the president of the Kennedy Center, because culturally, these are artless goobers. Never forget that. There's a resentment strain, just like what Stephen Miller, his resentment of Santa Monica and his resentment of California, Los Angeles, and how, these are resentful babies. Emotional babies who are also nihilists and psychopaths. Those are my words. I don't mean to make it uncomfortable for anybody. I'm just saying, wake up. Wake up. If it is this young man and he becomes the mayor of New York City, wake up to the target that is now on your back. And by being on your back, meaning on all of our backs, because we are here and it's not okay. Like, it's not okay. For that city to be in the hands of naivete at the level of not understanding that, there are people who we would, 20 years ago, never fathom would be okay with real harm coming to the United States and to U.S. citizens for their own personal political gain. But wake up.
I was going to say, I think.
Remember the upside down share slap? I'm reversing it back into this and going to come and I will share slap him.
Reverse it. I think that what we should do in New York, if it's not going to be Mamdani, obviously Erdogan should be the mayor of New York City, because he already ran Istanbul and he controls Eric Adams. Let's just eliminate the middleman. That should be the slogan. Erdogan, eliminate the middleman.
Eliminate the middleman.
Molly, thank you for staying up with us. Where can people find you? Let people know. Plug your stuff. What are you working on? What do you want to plug?
I mean, well, I will have some new stuff up soon at greatpower.us. There's some things I'm working on a diverse variety of topics, but there will be some Estonia related things. There will be some Ukraine related things. There will be some US related things coming soon. So mostly greatpower.us is where I'm writing right now. I'm more on Blue Sky these days at McKew. Then I still the Twitter account exists, but every time I open it, I feel dirty and I close it again.
Molly,
it's just Nazis. Yeah,
it's terrible. Yeah.
Well, it's very late there, and we really appreciate you coming on the show and spending time with us, sharing your wisdom and all that. And I know the people watching, I've been looking at the comments and they agree. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yay, Molly.
Yay.
Yay. We'll see you soon.
Hopefully I'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon.